All right, so I'm back. So last time we talked about data types and specifically primitive data types. However, today we will be talking about wrapper classes and what wrapper classes are. One thing I can tell you is we're not talking about wrapping classes. We're talking about wrapper classes. So let's move on. So wrapper classes. So what are they? Essentially, wrapper classes are basically object representations of primitive types. A better way of saying it is there are objects that wrap a primitive value and give it functionality. Okay. So the wrapper class for int are integers, the wrapper class for doubles are doubles, and so forth. Why do we have wrapper classes? So in addition to being able to add methods to primitives, they also allow primitives to work with collections such as array lists, generic types, such as list and various APIs. And they allow null values because I don't know if I mentioned this before, but primitive values they have a default value. If you don't assign a value to a primitive value, it'll default to that default value. So the default value for an int, for example, would be 0. It wouldn't be undefined or null. Okay. And the key features are, as I already mentioned, they add methods to primitives, such utility methods such as parseInt, compared to value of, and they support autoboxing and unboxing. So autoboxing is essentially you take the primitive and you wrap it, you box it up in the wrapper class. I mean, wrapper, the name wrapper itself literally tells you what it's doing. And unboxing is you retrieve the primitive value. And then some real world examples I think I already alluded to. So here you're using integer in a generic called list. And list is also a collection. And then integer, you can assign the variable age to integer so that it can accept the null value. And you can parse user input. So let's say you have a string, you have a number represented as a string, and you can convert that string to an integer using the parseInt method. And of course, primitives as a whole are faster to use because they don't have methods. Wrapper classes allow more flexibility because you have these methods, these utility methods. You can and you can also use them in various other data structures such as collections, generics. So let's move on to some example problems we can solve using wrapper classes. That's another lecture. Okay, now let's talk more about wrappers and see how these wrapper classes are used. So as I already mentioned, wrapper classes are classes that encapsulate or wrap a primitive into an object and give it functionality. And the wrapper classes correspond to the 8 primitives. So essentially, the wrapper class is essentially the name of the primitive with a capital letter, except if it's an int, then it becomes integer. And if it's char, it becomes character. Now let's go through the first problem. So we're going to take some strings and convert it to ints. So real world example is, whenever you're making API calls and you're using an ID, that the number may be represented as a string, but on the back end you may need to use it as a number. So what you do is you convert that string representation of a number to an actual number. So let's go ahead and do this problem. Convert strings to ints. So we're going to create a string called number 1 and number 2 and give it the respective values of 5 and 3. So I already did that here. So we have these numbers. So what we can do is we're going to use the parseInt method of the integer class to convert the strings to int. So let's so we have the So int parse number one equals integer parse int number one. Okay, let's fix this here. And then we can do the same for number two. Okay, and now let's print these. So we'll do a sys out. Then we'll do the same for the next one. So essentially what this does is it converts these to actual numbers. So we'll run this and see what we get. So we have 5 and 3. Okay. So it works. And now let's add these two. So we'll add these two numbers just to see the contrast. So if we just add these non-parsed strings, let's see what we get. Okay. Okay, so it concatenated the 5 and the 3 and gave you 53. Now let's do something different. So let's add the parsed numbers. Parse number one, parse number two. And these should add up to 8, by the way, in case you were wondering. And see, we get 8. So we can see the utility of this parsing method, that you take numerical representations of strings. So you take these strings and you convert them to numbers, and you can use them in various operations. Now let's do the same thing for doubles. So again, we're going to name them number one and number two, because I guess we can't be bothered coming up with different names. And honestly, sometimes the hardest thing about doing these exercises is just coming up with more variable names. So we're going to use the parse double method to convert the strings into doubles and add the doubles together and display the result. So what I'm going to do is, instead of typing all this out, I'm going to copy these. Okay. And let's uncomment these out. And we're going to change these to doubles. So okay. And the wrapper class we're using is double. So double. And it's going to be parse double. So parse double. Okay. So let's see what we get. So what do you think we're going to get? It's a double, right? So it's a decimal. So you're going to get a decimal printed out. So my guess is this is going to print out 5.0. This will print out 3.0. And it's going to print out the answer. Actually, no. I'm wrong. Let's change these values. Okay. Now let's run this. Okay. So it took these two and converted them to doubles, and gave you 8.5. Okay. So let's comment this out. So we've learned another wrapper class method, the parse double, which is a utility method from the double class, the double wrapper class. Okay. So let's do one more. So let's uncomment these out. Okay. And then we created 3 strings. We gave them these respective values. So we're going to extract the numbers from the strings, convert them to ints, and display the value of them added together. Okay. So this is going to involve some string methods which we have not which we haven't learned yet. So parsed one, and this is going to be an int equals number 1. So it's going to be substring, and this is 0, 1, 2, 3. So we're actually going to parse this whole thing. Okay. And then this will also be an integer because we're converting them to ints. Then parse 3. Be this. All right. So what we're doing is we're extracting the portion of the string that contains 11. So we're taking the substring of 11, the substring of 9, and the substring of 7. And we will learn more about the substring method when we talk about strings. So let's print this out. And we get 27. So as you can see, wrapper classes add functionality to primitives and allow us to do nice things with them, such as extract values from them. So I'm going to stop here, and until next time, peace.